Welcome to this presentation, Bridging Brains, Exploring Gendered Attitudes and Inequalities in a Mind Sport. I'm Sam Punch, and this project is part of Bridge a Mind Sport for All, which is a project about the sociology of mind sport based at the University of Stirling. You can see Miriam and I here with photos of Sabine and Zia, who are world champions at Bridge. Whilst this paper uses the case study of Bridge, we think it will also speak to other areas of sport, mind sport, that are interested in unequal gender representation. You don't need to understand anything about the mechanics of Bridge in order to engage with this paper. We're just using Bridge as this lens to understand gendered discourse in relation to a mind sport and leisure activity. So all you need to know, it's a 4-player card game that's always played in partnership. You always sit opposite your partner at the bridge table, as can be seen in this photo. And you play with a normal pack of cards, and the game involves trying to work out who holds what cards. So around the world, roughly equal numbers of men and women play the game. But at the very top levels, men do dominate. So as these statistics show, these are high-level tournaments in different parts of the world, and the total number of the numbers of players who have won over recent decades, and you can see the smaller number is the number of women that have won. So male players then strongly outperform female players worldwide, and this paper is looking at the explanations given for that. So in terms of methods, I am an insider to the bridge world. I represent Scotland. And so I did the interviews, but the rest of the research team are not bridge players. And so they did the initial analysis, and then later we combined our insider and outsider perspectives. And the paper named here that you can find on our website discusses that methodological process. So do bear in mind that this paper is based on elite players at the top of the game, so they have all represented their country, and it may be different for club level players or social players, and we have another project that's looking at that. We have changed all the players' names to protect their identities. So before we look at the data, just to explore some of the literature behind this, the dominant argument in popular discourse that probably everyone's familiar with is that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So this suggests then that differences between male and female brains are both significant and biologically fixed. And there have been quite a few critiques of these traditional neuroscientific arguments. So research in this area has been found to significantly overstate the extent and nature of human brain sex differences. And another body of research has seriously challenged this binary distinction between male and female brains, pointing to significantly more convergence rather than divergence between brains. There's also been many challenges to the credibility of traditional neuroscience, pointing in particular to the lack of robust evidence. Traditional claims have been constantly questioned by more contemporary neuroscience. So just to give one particular example, there's a long-standing debate around left versus right thinking. And this theory has argued that males have more neural connections in the left side of their brain, and the left side is associated with logic, analysis, and action. And in contrast, the theory is that females have more neural activity in the right side of their brains, and that's associated with intuition, emotion, thoughtfulness. But many say that this is a gendered myth and that there's not enough evidence to support this left versus right brain thinking. And there's a lot of evidence that actually disputes it. So as Hill says, there's gaps, assumptions, speculation, leaps of faith, and bad methodologies. And Spellman points out then again that the differences between the sexes are significantly smaller than those within the sexes. So a key issue is that these traditional arguments remain strong in popular discourse. The idea that men can read maps, but women are better at reading emotions. And this does have consequence for how males and females are understood and valued in contemporary society. So as Ripon argues, this is an example of neurosexism. And neurosexism is the practice of claiming that there are fixed differences between male and female brains, which can explain women's inferiority or unsuitability for certain roles. So this ends up constructing then gendered hierarchies of capability and incapability, which end up appearing normalized and natural rather than socially learned. And in turn, then, as Fine argues, this can perpetuate into prolonging gender inequalities and stereotypes, as we will now see in the data with our interviews with elite players. So within our interview data, 32 out of the 40 participants expressed strong views on the differences between male and female playing abilities. And when they were asked why the top men players are more successful at bridge than women, they referred to three key observations. Firstly, that men are more single-minded than women. Secondly, that men are perceived to be more rational, logical thinkers. And thirdly, that men are perceived to be more competitive than women. And what's interesting to note then is that these explanations were mentioned by both male and female players. So as Nadine said, on a general level, men tend to be more logical. Most good bridge players go to uni and do maths, and they tend to be better at that sort of thing compared to girls. So men are more rational or are perceived more rational. And as William states, it's established that women have more of their brain wired for emotion generally than men do. So these examples show then that many of the players were not aware that these notions about how brains are wired have actually been strongly challenged in more recent neuroscience literature. So men's emotions then tend to be given also a more positive status in relation to bridge, and women's emotions tend to be given in a more negative light. So at the bridge table, men are described as getting angry, whereas women are described as getting upset. So competition was also referred to as a more masculine trait. A quarter of our sample perceived men to be more competitive than women, and these were equally split between male and female players. And of all the women players who thought that men were more competitive, they based their perceptions on generalizations. But what was interesting, when they spoke about themselves, they described themselves as extremely competitive. And the men also spoke in quite general terms, with just one linking it to the different ways that boys and girls are raised from a young age. So as Scott says, well, for one thing, men do a lot of competitive sports when they're growing up, so the idea of winning is very important to men psychologically. Because of that, I think they're doing their best when they play bridge all the time. Women are more interested in playing nice, being seen as a friendly person. They're more social. So this reflects then the common stereotype that women want to socialize and men want to compete. And research has shown then that competitiveness is largely influenced by the ways that boys and girls are socialized from a very young age, but only a minority of our interviewees referred to this. And most actually talked about rationality, competitiveness, natural ability as being the reasons to justify why more men succeed at the top compared with women, and that these ideas were reproduced by both male and female players to different degrees. So when both men and women are reproducing such ideas that women are inferior players, and in turn they alter their behaviour, these assumptions then about skill can become to be seen as fixed and innate, rather than one of opportunity, access and support. And this goes back then to what Fine argued around neurosexist notions, and that these instill very powerful ideas about what men and women can and can't do, and what they should and shouldn't be doing in both their personal and their professional lives. And this can have serious implications then for the sorts of opportunities that are available to males and females. It also affects the opportunities that are actively pursued by them at any age. So in terms of bridge then, which demands a degree of mental toughness, confidence and competitiveness amongst other attributes, this can mean that some female players struggle, as this quote by Andrea suggests. Because men are considered better players than women are, there's a general perception when you play together with them, many women feel the pressure and don't perform as well. So for the best women to be perceived as competent as the best male players, they don't only have to play well, but they also have to engage in performative gender roles that draw on male understanding of successful play. And this isn't necessarily an easy process, particularly if they've not fostered these traits as they were growing up, as Megan says. I had to toughen up a lot, because if you're going to play with and against the men, or you're going to try and beat the men, and if they're quite tough and aggressive, then you have to be quite tough and aggressive, both in your style of play, but also in your behaviour. So in the interviews, players discussed women who had been very successful at the top of the game. But globally, I would say that fewer than 5 would be readily named as equal to their male counterparts. So fewer than 5 women globally are considered as equals to men at the bridge table. But when they are described, these women, at the very top, they're described in masculine terms as powerful, competitive, logical, even intimidating. Colin here refers to a specific top elite female player. She's some of the best focus of any player I've ever played with. Probably all really good bridge players are really competitive, and she just doesn't even have a lapse in concentration. She has unbelievably analytical mind, happy to back her judgment. She's played hands that were really incredible. She's one of the best people I've ever seen sort of reading her opponent's discards accurately. So these findings then support Jost and Major's study that described how female professors provided very masculine self-descriptions when asked to describe themselves. So in our sample, some of the most successful elite female players do display behaviours that are typically perceived to be male, either because they're used to being in male-dominated environments or because they've adapted their behaviour. But these stereotypes then show that these beliefs about male brains are actively reproduced by both men and women players. So as a result, inequality at the top of the game is more likely then to be explained through different opportunities that are available to male players that may not be equitably granted to female players. And this goes back to the neuroscience literature. There's a more recent field known as neuroplasticity. And this is where, rather than being fixed and isolated, the human brain is seen as a deeply responsive organ, constantly restructuring and changing in reply to social events and expectations. So it's argued then that societies tend to expect and want very different things for males and females, causing specific environments and opportunities to flourish around men and women. So rather than it being the superiority of males over females at the card game bridge that's purely down to biology and brains, instead it's more likely to be the result of gender discrepancies between the amount of training opportunities and education, whether that's formal or informal, that are provided to male and female players. So we've seen then that traditional neuroscientific arguments have come to dominate how performance in the mind sport of bridge is understood. And these assumptions of brain differences were expressed by both men and women, and this illustrates the power of such fixed notions about the human brain. It's likely then that such beliefs will also impact on opportunities in terms of access to training and participation for women in mind sport. So ideas about men being more rational, logical, and competitive are used to explain why so few women have succeeded. But actually what happens is these essentialist constructs of gender then dominate rather than recognizing that the unequal opportunities arise out of socially learned behaviors. These then become reproduced and ultimately reinforce male superiority within the game to the detriment of female bridge players. The long-term effects of these ingrained gendered discourses require further research, and that's something that we're now looking into. We have more information on our website if you're interested about other research into mind sport, and we really welcome dialogue and questions from you, as this is a new area that we're researching. So we're very keen to hear your feedback, including any suggestions about which journals might be interested in publishing around gender and bridge. Many thanks for listening.